A single mom takes on the challenge of caring for two paraplegic twins, but she soon faces traumatized boys and a cold, distant millionaire who refuses to trust her. He's shocked to discover she's not just a caregiver, but the woman who might finally heal his pain. If this story hooked you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. The third eviction notice stared back at Sarah Mitchell from the kitchen counter, its bold red lettering seeming to mock her efforts of the past 3 months. Outside the window of her cramped Boston apartment, the November sky hung gray and oppressive, mirroring the weight that pressed down on her shoulders. At 32, Sarah hadn't imagined life would look like this, barely keeping afloat, working 2 jobs, and still struggling to provide for her 8-year-old son, Ethan. She glanced at the clock, 2:30 p.m. Ethan would be home from school soon, and she'd promised him they would have a special dinner tonight. Not that special meant much these days, perhaps spaghetti with actual ground beef instead of the cheaper vegetarian alternative they'd grown accustomed to. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Sarah hesitated before answering, dreading another debt collector. "Hello, is this Sarah Mitchell?" The woman's voice was crisp, professional. "Yes, this is she. I'm calling from Hartwell Staffing Agency. We received your application for the live-in caregiver position." Sarah's heart quickened. She had applied to dozens of jobs in the past. Weak, but this particular one had stood out. The salary was nearly triple what she currently made, plus room and board. It seemed too good to be true, which usually meant it was. "I'm calling to inform you that our client, Mr. Alexander Blackwood, would like to interview you tomorrow at 10 a.m. The position is to care for his twin sons." Sarah clutched the phone tighter. That's wonderful, I'll be there." After the call ended, Sarah sank into a kitchen chair. Alexander Blackwood was a name she recognized, a tech entrepreneur whose fortune had made headlines even in the corners of society where Sarah existed. What she knew about him was limited to tabloid snippets: widower, reclusive, intensely private about his family following some kind of tragedy. The front door opened with a familiar squeak. "Mom, I got an A on my science project." Ethan burst into the kitchen, his backpack bobbing behind him, dark hair windswept, his eyes, so much like his father's, bright with excitement. Sarah pulled her son into a tight hug, inhaling the scent of playground dust and the peanut butter sandwich she'd packed that morning. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I knew all that hard work would pay off." Ethan wriggled out of her embrace and began rummaging through his backpack. "Ms. Thompson said my volcano was the best in class. Ryan said his was better, but his didn't even erupt right." Sarah smiled, watching her son's animated gestures. Michael had been gone for 3 years now, a head-on collision on Route 9 during a summer thunderstorm, but she saw him every day in Ethan's expressions, in the way he tilted his head when concentrating, in his stubbornness and curiosity. "Hey, buddy," she said, kneeling to meet his eye level. "I have a job interview tomorrow. It's for a position that might mean some big changes for us." Ethan's face fell slightly. "Will you have to work nights again?" "Actually, it's a live-in position. We'd move into the employer's home." "But what about school? What about my friends?" Sarah brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "It's in Beacon Hill. Not too far. You'd have to change schools, but we'd have a nice place to live, and I'd make enough money so I wouldn't have to work multiple jobs anymore. That means more time with you." Ethan considered this, his 8-year-old mind processing the trade-offs with surprising maturity. "Would I have my own room?" Sarah laughed. "I don't know yet, but I think it's likely. The house is supposed to be very big." The next morning, Sarah stood before the imposing wrought-iron gates of the Blackwood mansion, her second-best blouse ironed within an inch of its life, and her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The house beyond the gates was a stunning brownstone, massive by Boston standards, with large windows and an immaculate facade that spoke of old money and careful preservation. A security guard checked her ID before allowing her through the gate. Sarah followed the stone pathway to the front door, each step feeling like a journey into another world, one where people didn't worry about choosing between electricity and groceries. The door opened before she could knock. A woman in her 50s, with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes, appraised her. "Miss Mitchell?" "Yes, I'm here for the interview with Mr. Blackwood." "I'm Eleanor Hayes, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. Please come in." The woman's tone wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't warm either. Sarah followed Eleanor through the foyer, trying not to gawk at the soaring ceilings, the intricate woodwork, the original artwork on the walls. The house was undeniably beautiful, but possessed a strange emptiness, as if it were a museum rather than a home. "Mr. Blackwood is very particular about who interacts with his sons," Eleanor explained as they walked. "The boys have special needs following their accident 2 years ago. The previous caregiver, well, she found the situation overwhelming." Sarah nodded, remembering the brief job. Description: twin boys, age 10, both requiring wheelchair assistance and physical therapy following an accident. What the description hadn't mentioned was that their father was Alexander Blackwood, or that the position had apparently already chewed up and spat out at least one predecessor. Eleanor led her to a study where a man stood with his back to the door, gazing out a tall window. Even from behind, Alexander Blackwood commanded presence. Broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, dark hair showing the first hints of grey at the temples. "Mr. Blackwood, Sarah Mitchell is here," Eleanor announced before quietly withdrawing. He turned and Sarah found herself facing one of the most striking men she'd ever seen. His features were sharp and classically handsome, but it was his eyes that captured her attention, deep blue and haunted by shadows that suggested sleepless nights and unresolved pain. "Miss Mitchell." His voice was deep, his handshake firm but brief. "Please sit down." Sarah lowered herself into a leather chair opposite his desk, straightening her skirt and trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel. "I'll be direct," he said, remaining standing. "I need someone capable of providing round-the-clock care for my sons, Oliver and Owen. They're intelligent, strong-willed boys who happen to be in wheelchairs following a car accident 2 years ago. The physical challenges are significant, but manageable with proper care. The emotional ones," he paused, a muscle in his jaw tightening, "are more complicated." Sarah nodded, recognizing the weight behind his words. "I understand. Children process trauma differently than adults." Something flickered across his face, surprised perhaps that she hadn't immediately offered platitudes. "Yes, they do. My sons lost their mother in the accident that took their mobility. They've had difficulty trusting caregivers since then. The last 3 didn't last more than a month each." "May I ask why they left?" Alexander's expression hardened, slightly. "Various reasons. The most recent found the boys' behavior too challenging. They can be resistant to forming attachments." Sarah considered this. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been a single mother since my husband's passing 3 years ago. I understand what it means to guide a child through grief." For a moment, something vulnerable flashed in his eyes, before disappearing behind a practiced mask of professional detachment. "Your application mentioned your son, Ethan, correct? He would naturally join you here. The house has plenty of room." "Yes, he's 8. If I'm caring for your children, I couldn't leave him." Alexander nodded. "Of course. Now, regarding your qualifications, you have no formal training in physical therapy or childhood development." It wasn't quite a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "No, but I'm a quick learner, and I understand that the position includes working alongside professional therapists who visit regularly. What I can offer is consistency, patience, and genuine care. Sometimes that's what children need most." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "The position requires you to live here full-time, with 1 day off per week. The salary is $85,000 annually, plus room and board for you and your son, health insurance included. In return, I expect absolute dedication to my son's well-being and complete discretion regarding my family." Sarah tried not to let her shock show. That salary would solve every financial problem she had, with enough left over to start saving for Ethan's college fund. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "Immediately. Tomorrow, if possible." Sarah inhaled deeply. It was happening. Too fast. Yet the eviction notice flashed in her mind, along with Ethan's face when she'd had to tell him they couldn't afford summer camp this year. "I'd like to meet the boys first," she said firmly. "If they're comfortable with me and I with them, then yes, I can start tomorrow." Surprise registered on Alexander's face again, as if he wasn't accustomed to conditions being placed on his offers. Then, unexpectedly, a ghost of appreciation crossed his features. "Very well, Miss Mitchell. Let's introduce you to Oliver and Owen." Sarah followed Alexander through the sprawling mansion, noting how his footsteps barely made a sound on the polished hardwood floors. The house was immaculate, but strangely devoid of the usual chaos that accompanied children. No scattered toys, no fingerprints on the glass surfaces, no evidence that 10-year-old boys lived here at all. "The boys are in the sunroom," Alexander explained, his voice low. "They usually spend mornings there, with their tutor, Dr. Winters. Since the accident, they've been homeschooled." Sarah nodded, mentally cataloguing this information. Homeschooled, isolated, two crucial pieces of the puzzle she was trying to assemble. Before they reached the sunroom, Alexander paused, turning to face her with unexpected intensity. "Miss Mitchell, there's something you should know. The boys can be challenging. They've developed a certain defense mechanism since losing their mother. They tend to test new people in their lives, sometimes cruelly." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood, all children test boundaries. It's how they learn what's safe and what isn't. I don't expect your sons to trust me immediately." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face before he nodded and continued walking. The sunroom was a beautiful space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking an immaculately maintained garden. Despite the November chill outside, the room was comfortably warm, bathed in natural light. In the center sat two identical boys in wheelchairs, their heads bent over textbooks, while a middle-aged woman with spectacles pointed to something on one of the pages. "Oliver, Owen," Alexander called softly, "I'd like you to meet someone." The boys looked up in unison, and Sarah was struck by how much they resembled their father, the same dark hair, the same striking blue eyes. But where? Alexander's expression was guarded. The twins' faces showed open hostility. "This is Ms. Mitchell," Alexander continued. "She's interviewing for the caregiver position." The woman with the spectacles stood. "We were just finishing our history lesson. I'm Dr. Winters," she said, extending her hand to Sarah. "The boy's tutor." Sarah shook her hand, noting the woman's appraising look. "It's nice to meet you." "We don't need another babysitter," one of the twins said flatly. "We told Dad that already." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Oliver, that's enough. Ms. Mitchell is not a babysitter. She's a professional caregiver who's here to help you and your brother." The boy, Oliver, scoffed. "Like the last one. She ran away crying after 2 weeks." 3 weeks, the other twin, Owen, corrected with a small, cruel smile. "But who's counting?" Sarah observed the exchange carefully. Their words were hostile, but she recognized the pain and fear lurking beneath the surface. These weren't bad children, they were wounded ones. "Actually," she said calmly, moving to kneel between their wheelchairs so she was at eye level with them, "I was hoping we could get to know each other a bit before anyone decides anything." The twins exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. "I have a son about your age," she continued. "His name is Ethan. He's 8. "Is he in a wheelchair too?" Owen asked, his tone challenging. Sarah maintained her composure. "No, he's not. But he did lose his father 3 years ago, so he knows something about what it's like when life changes suddenly." This information seemed to catch the boys off guard. They glanced at each other again, a silent communication passing between them. "Miss Mitchell would be moving in with her son if she takes the position," Alexander explained to the twins. "Dr. Winters, that will be all for today, thank you." The tutor gathered her materials and left, giving Sarah an encouraging smile on her way out. "Why don't you show Ms. Mitchell your project?" Alexander suggested, his tone gentler than Sarah had heard it so far. Oliver's face remained stony, but Owen's expression shifted slightly. "The robots?" he asked his father. Alexander nodded. "I think she'd be interested." Owen wheeled himself toward a table in the corner of the room, checking to see if Sarah followed. She did, aware of Oliver's suspicious gaze tracking her movement. On the table sat an elaborate Lego construction, a miniature city with working parts. Small motors powered elevators in tiny skyscrapers, while LED lights blinked in patterns throughout the streets. "We built it ourselves," Owen said, a hint of pride breaking through his guarded exterior. "Dad helped with some of the wiring, but we designed everything." Sarah examined the intricate creation with genuine admiration. "This is incredible. How long did it take you to build?" 6 months, Oliver answered, having wheeled over to join them. "We work on it every day after lessons." "The buildings are all wheelchair accessible," Owen added, pointing to tiny ramps and elevators. "Not like the real world." Sarah caught the bitterness in his voice. "It sounds like you've thought a lot about design and accessibility." "We have to," Oliver said bluntly. "Nobody else does." Alexander stood slightly apart, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. Sarah could feel his scrutiny, but kept her focus on the boys. "If I came to work here," she said carefully, "would you let me and my son Ethan see more of your city?" The twins exchanged another look. "Maybe," Owen finally said, "if he doesn't touch anything without permission." Sarah smiled. "That seems fair." Alexander cleared his throat. "Boys, Ms. Mitchell, and I need to discuss a few more things. Please continue with your reading until lunch." As they left the sunroom, Sarah felt the boy's eyes on her back. The interview wasn't over. It had only just begun. Alexander led her to a small sitting room and gestured for her to take a seat on one of the plush armchairs. For the first time, he seemed slightly less formal, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture that hinted at the strain he carried. "You handled that well," he said. "Better than most, but I should warn you, they were on their best behavior." Sarah nodded. "I understand. Mr. Blackwood, may I ask a direct question?" "Please." "How involved are you in your son's daily lives?" His expression hardened immediately. "I provide everything they need. The best medical care, education, opportunities." "That's not what I asked," Sarah interrupted gently. "I meant, how much time do you spend with them? Not supervising or providing, but just being their father?" Alexander stared at her, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "My work requires significant travel and long hours. That's why I need a full-time caregiver." "Of course," Sarah said. "I'm just trying to understand the family dynamic I'd be entering." A tense silence stretched between them before Alexander spoke again. Since the accident, things have been difficult. The boys and I—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "We remind each other of what we've lost." The raw honesty of his statement caught Sarah by surprise. She could see it now, the guilt that shadowed his eyes, the way he held himself at a distance from his sons. "I'm not a therapist, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, "but I am a parent who's navigated grief with a child. Sometimes what helps most isn't moving forward or trying to fix things. It's simply acknowledging that you're both still here, still trying." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a momentary crack in his carefully maintained facade. Then it was gone, replaced by his businesslike demeanor. "If you accept the position, you would have a suite on the 3rd floor, a bedroom, for you, one for your son, and a shared sitting area. The boys' rooms are on the 2nd floor along with the main playroom and study area. My quarters and office are in the east wing." Sarah recognized the change of subject for what it was, a retreat to safer ground. "And my responsibilities would include helping the boys with morning and evening routines, overseeing physical therapy exercises, accompanying them to medical appointments, supervising their educational activities between Dr. Winter's sessions, and generally ensuring their physical and emotional well-being." "What about household staff? Do you have others who help with meals, cleaning, that sort of thing?" Alexander nodded. "Mrs. Reynolds is the housekeeper. She manages the cleaning staff and prepares lunch and dinner. Mr. Peterson handles the grounds and driving when needed. Eleanor, whom you met, manages my schedule and business affairs but has limited interaction with the boys." Sarah took a deep breath, weighing everything she'd seen and heard. The position would solve her financial problems and provide a stable home for Ethan. The work would be challenging, certainly, but not impossible. The twins were hurting, defensive. but she had glimpsed intelligence and vulnerability beneath their hostility. Then there was Alexander Blackwood himself, a puzzle of contradictions, a father who clearly wanted the best for his sons, but seemed unable to bridge the emotional gap between them, a man living with grief and guilt that appeared to consume him from within. "I'll need to speak with Ethan before giving you my final answer," she said. "This will impact his life significantly, and I need to make sure he understands and is comfortable with the change." Alexander seemed to respect this. "Of course. When can you let me know?" "This evening. If Ethan agrees, we could move in tomorrow, as requested." "Very well." Alexander stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "I must say, Miss Mitchell, you're not what I expected." Sarah rose as well. "What did you expect, Mr. Blackwood?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Someone who would be overwhelmed by the challenge or blinded by the compensation. You seem to be neither. I'm a single mother who's been through hardship, Mr. Blackwood. It takes more than a beautiful house and difficult children to overwhelm me. And while the money is important, I won't pretend it isn't, my son's well-being comes first. Always." Alexander walked her to the door, maintaining a careful distance. "Respect that, Miss Mitchell. I'll await your call." As Sarah left the Blackwood mansion, her mind raced with everything she'd observed, the twins' hostility masking fear, Alexander's distance concealing pain. A beautiful home emptied of joy and warmth. If she took this job, she wouldn't just be caring for 2 boys in wheelchairs. She'd be stepping into a family fractured by tragedy, one where each member was isolated in their own grief. The practical side of her recognized the opportunity, financial security, a beautiful place to live, steady employment. But Sarah had always trusted her instincts above all else, and they were telling her something important. This family needed more than a caregiver. They needed someone who wasn't afraid of their pain, someone who could help them find their way back to each other. The question was whether she was prepared to take on that responsibility, not just for the generous salary, but for the wounded souls inside that mansion. And if she did, could she protect her own heart and her son's in the process? "How promised we could keep our apartment until Christmas," Ethan said, his lower lip trembling as he watched Sarah pack their meager belongings into cardboard boxes borrowed from the grocery store. 3 weeks had passed since they'd moved into the Blackwood mansion, and today they were officially giving up their apartment. Sarah knelt beside her son, brushing his dark hair from his forehead, a gesture that had comforted him since infancy. "I know, sweetie, but it doesn't make sense to keep paying rent when we're not living here. Think of all the things we can do with that money instead, like saving for that Nintendo Switch you've been wanting." Ethan's face brightened momentarily, then fell again. "But what if Mr. Blackwood fires you? Where will we live then?" The question hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. It was the same fear that woke her in the middle of the night, heart racing. "That's not going to happen," she assured him, with more confidence than she felt. "But even if it did, we'd figure something out. We always do, right?" Ethan nodded reluctantly. "I guess, but I still don't like Oliver and Owen. They're mean." Sarah sighed. The twins had been particularly difficult with Ethan, excluding him from activities and making snide comments about his normal legs. They'd even hidden his backpack on his first day at his new school, causing him to be late to class. "They're going through a tough time," she reminded him gently. "Remember how angry you were after Daddy's accident? How you used to throw your toys and yell at me?" "I was little then," Ethan protested. "You were 5, not that little. And you were hurting. Oliver and Owen are hurting too." She squeezed his shoulder. "Just give them a little more time, okay? You might be surprised." Later that afternoon, Sarah helped the twins with their physical therapy exercises in the mansion's state-of-the-art gym. Dr. Martinez, their physical therapist, had just left after his bi-weekly session, leaving Sarah to oversee the boys practicing the movements he'd demonstrated. "I don't want to do any more," Oliver complained, dropping the resistance band he'd been using to strengthen his arms. "This is stupid." "It's not stupid," Sarah corrected calmly. "Dr. Martinez said that consistent exercise could help improve your, What? Our chances of walking again? Oliver sneered. He's lying. All of them lie. Sarah set down the clipboard, where she'd been tracking their exercises. I don't think he's lying. I think he's being hopeful. There's a difference. Hope is for little kids and idiots, Owen muttered, though he continued his exercises more diligent than his brother. I don't believe that, Sarah said quietly. And I don't think you do, either. Oliver glared at her. What do you know? Your legs work fine. Your life is perfect. Sarah had learned that direct confrontation rarely worked with the twins. Instead, she sat down on a nearby bench. My life is far from perfect, Oliver. Before coming here, Ethan and I were about to be evicted from our apartment. I was working 2 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. The twins exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her candor. What about Ethan's dad? Owen asked, his voice losing some of its edge. Doesn't he help you? Ethan's father died in a car accident 3 years ago, Sarah answered honestly. He was driving home in a thunderstorm. A truck crossed the center line. The gym fell silent except for the hum of the equipment. Sarah could see the boys processing this information, making connections to their own loss. Did you see it happen? Oliver finally asked, his voice smaller than usual. Sarah shook her head. No, I was at home with Ethan. The police came to our door. Another silence, heavier this time. We saw it, Owen whispered. Mom was driving us home from swimming lessons. It was raining. Sarah felt her heart constrict, but kept her expression calm. This was the first time either twin had voluntarily mentioned the accident. The other car came out of nowhere, Oliver continued, staring at the floor. Mum tried to turn away, but it hit us on her side. The car flipped over. We were hanging upside down, Owen added. I could see Mum, but she wasn't moving. Oliver was screaming. Sarah fought the urge to gather them both in her arms, knowing they would reject such an overt display of sympathy. Instead, she asked gently, What about your dad? Was he in the car too? The twins shook their heads in unison. He was in Japan on business, Oliver said, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. He didn't get home until 2 days after. By then, they'd already told us Mum was gone and that we might never walk again, Owen finished. The pieces were falling into place for Sarah. Alexander's absence during the immediate aftermath of the accident, the guilt that shadowed his eyes, the distance he maintained from his sons. That must have been incredibly frightening, she said softly. To go through all that without your father there. Oliver shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant despite the emotion in his eyes. We had each other. We always have. Sarah nodded, understanding now the fierce bond between the twins. They had been each other's only constant in a world that had been violently upended. Is that why you're so hard on the caregivers? Because they're not your mum. The question was direct, perhaps too direct, but Sarah sensed that the moment called for honesty. Owen looked away, but Oliver met her gaze defiantly. They pretend they care about us, but they're just here for the money. Like you. The accusation stung, but Sarah didn't let it show. I won't lie to you, Oliver. The money is important to me. It means security for Ethan. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you and Owen. The two aren't mutually exclusive. What's mutually exclusive mean? Owen asked. It means 2 things that can't exist together, Sarah explained, like being asleep and awake at the same time. But caring about someone while also needing a job, those things can absolutely exist together. The boys seemed to consider this, the hostility in their expressions softening slightly. Now, Sarah said, standing up, you still have 15 minutes of exercises left. After that, we could play that new video game you've been talking about, the one with the zombies that your dad doesn't know about. Oliver's eyes widened. How did you... I found it under your mattress when I was changing your sheets, Sarah said with a small smile. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, as long as you finish your exercises. For the first time since she'd met them, both boys smiled at her, tentative, fleeting, but real. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep, Sarah found herself in the mansion's vast kitchen, making a cup of tea. The day had been emotionally draining, and tomorrow promised to be equally challenging with doctor appointments for both boys. You're up late." Sarah startled at the sound of Alexander's voice. He stood in the doorway, suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking more human than she'd seen him yet. "I could say the same to you," she replied, gesturing to the kettle. "Tea?" Alexander hesitated before nodding. "Thank you." As Sarah prepared a second cup, she sensed him watching her, evaluating her, as he seemed to evaluate everything, with careful distance and analysis. "The boys mentioned their mother today," she said, placing his tea on the island between them. "They talked about the accident." Alexander's hand froze mid-reach for the cup. "They did? They never discuss it with anyone." Sarah leaned against the counter. "It came up during PT. They drew parallels between their experience and mine with losing my husband." Alexander wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. What exactly did they say? Sarah recounted the conversation, watching as emotions played across his face, pain, guilt, and something that looked like longing. "They said you were in Japan when it happened," she concluded, "that you didn't get back for 2 days. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I was negotiating a merger. My phone was off during a critical meeting by the time I got the messages." His voice trailed off, the memory clearly still raw. "When I finally arrived at the hospital, Lillian was gone. The boys were in separate rooms, heavily sedated. The doctors were still unsure if they would walk again." "That must have been devastating," Sarah said softly. "For all of you." Alexander stared into his untouched tea. "I should have been there, if I'd been driving instead of Lillian." "You can't think that way," Sarah interrupted gently. "Trust me, I know. After Michael died, I tortured myself with what-ifs. What if I'd asked him to come home earlier? What if I'd warned him about the storm? It doesn't help. It only keeps the wound open." Alexander looked up, his blue eyes intense in the dim kitchen light. "How did you move past it?" "I didn't, not completely," Sarah admitted, "but I learned to live with it, for Ethan's sake at first, then eventually for my own." A comfortable silence settled between them, something new in their usually formal interactions. "The boys seem to be accepting you," Alexander finally said, "more quickly than I anticipated." Sarah smiled slightly. "I've had a few breakthroughs, although I suspect they're just weighing whether I'm worth the trouble of chasing off." For the first time, Sarah saw Alexander smile, a genuine expression that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and hinting at the man he might have been before tragedy reshaped him. "You underestimate yourself, Miss Mitchell." "Sarah," she corrected. "After 3 weeks of living in your home and caring for your children, I think we can move to first names." Alexander seemed to consider this. "Sarah, then, and yes, I suppose you've earned that." "Does that mean I can call you Alex?" The question was bold, perhaps too familiar, but Sarah found herself wanting to challenge the walls he had built around himself. His eyebrows rose slightly. "No one calls me Alex. Not since—" He hesitated. "Not since Lillian." "I understand," Sarah said, recognizing she had pushed too far. "Alexander, it is." He surprised her by shaking his head. "No, it's fine. Alex is fine." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small but significant realignment, like tectonic plates moving imperceptibly beneath the surface. "Well then, Alex," Sarah said, finishing her tea, "I should get some sleep. The boys have appointments with Dr. Sharma tomorrow morning." Alex nodded. "Of course, thank you for the tea. And for what you're doing with Oliver and Owen, I've noticed a difference in them already." As Sarah headed upstairs to her suite, she reflected on the strange path her life had taken. 3 weeks ago she had been desperate, on the verge of losing everything. Now she was living in a mansion, caring for twin boys who were slowly letting her into their wounded hearts, and having late-night tea with their enigmatic father. Progress, she decided. Small steps, but progress nonetheless. What she didn't know was that across town, someone was watching the Blackwood mansion with keen interest, someone whose return would threaten everything Sarah was working to build. December arrived with a flurry of snowflakes that transformed Boston into a winter wonderland. The Blackwood mansion, with its tall windows and grand architecture, looked like something from a Christmas card, especially after the staff decorated the exterior with tasteful white lights that illuminated the snow-covered grounds. Inside, a transformation of a different kind was taking place. 2 months into her position, Sarah had established routines that brought structure to the twins' days. Physical therapy was followed by educational activities, then free time that increasingly included Ethan, whose natural enthusiasm had slowly begun to chip away at the twins' defenses. On this particular afternoon, Sarah stood in the doorway of the playroom, watching as the 3 boys huddled around the massive Lego city that now took up an entire table. What had begun as the twins' private project had expanded to include a section that was distinctly Ethan's, slightly less polished, but bursting with creativity. The monorail should connect here, Oliver was saying, pointing to a junction between buildings. That way people can travel between all 3 neighborhoods. But what about wheelchair access at this station? Owen asked, frowning at the structure. We could build a special elevator, Ethan suggested, already digging through a bin of parts. Like the one in the Science Museum we visited last week. Sarah smiled, remembering the outing, their first beyond medical appointments. Alexander had surprised everyone by arranging a private tour of the Boston Science Museum before opening hours, allowing the boys to explore without the usual crowds and stares that made the twins self-conscious. Ms. Mitchell, Mrs. Reynolds, appeared beside her, the housekeeper's normally composed face looking troubled. There's someone at the door asking for Mr. Blackwood. She's quite insistent, says she's family, but Mr. Blackwood is at the office and left instructions not to be disturbed. Did she give a name? Sarah asked, immediately alert to any disruption, to the fragile peace they'd established. Victoria Mercer. She says she's the boy's stepmother, but I don't recall Mr. Blackwood ever mentioning. She's not our stepmother. Owen's sharp voice cut through their conversation. Both boys had wheeled themselves to the doorway, their faces suddenly tight with anger. She was engaged to Dad, but they never got married. She left after the accident, Oliver added, his voice cold. She didn't want broken kids. Sarah felt a chill run through her. In all these weeks, neither Alexander nor the boys had mentioned anyone named Victoria. I'll handle this, she told Mrs. Reynolds. Boys, stay here with Ethan, please. As she walked toward the foyer, Sarah's mind raced. A fiancé who had abandoned the family after the accident. This explained another layer of the twins' distrust of caregivers, their fear of being left again by someone who claimed to care for them. The woman waiting in the foyer was striking, tall and slender, with the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive treatments and careful maintenance. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves around a face that belonged on magazine covers, and her camel coat looked like it cost more than Sarah's old apartment. Mrs. Reynolds, I don't appreciate being kept waiting, the woman said, her voice cultured, but sharp. Alexander needs to know I'm here. Mr. Blackwood is at work, Sarah said, stepping forward. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the boy's caregiver. Victoria Mercer's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose as she assessed Sarah from head to toe. Another one. How long have you lasted? A week? 2? 2 months, actually, Sarah replied evenly. Mr. Blackwood asked not to be disturbed today. Perhaps if you'd called ahead. I don't need an appointment to visit my family, Victoria interrupted, removing her gloves with deliberate movements. The boys will be thrilled to see me. It's been too long. Sarah blocked her path when she moved toward the stairs. I'm sorry, but as their caregiver, I can't allow unplanned visits that might disrupt their routine, especially from someone they haven't seen in. She deliberately left the question hanging. Victoria's smile turned brittle. Alexander and I have simply been taking some time apart to reassess our priorities. The boys are practically my stepsons. That's not how they describe your relationship, Sarah said, keeping her voice level despite her growing dislike for this woman. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You're just the help. You don't understand the complexities of our family situation. I understand enough to know that the twins are finally making progress emotionally, and I won't let anyone jeopardize that, even someone who claims to be family. For a moment, Sarah thought Victoria might argue further, but instead she reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a business card, which she handed to Sarah with a cold smile. "Please inform Alexander that I'm back in Boston, permanently. I've been doing a lot of thinking during my time away, and I've realized what truly matters." She glanced around the foyer. "This house has always felt empty without a woman's touch. I'm ready to provide that again." Before Sarah could respond, the distinct sound of wheelchair wheels on hardwood made them both turn. Oliver and Owen had positioned themselves at the entrance to the hallway, their faces masks of hostility. "We don't want you here," Oliver said flatly. "Dad doesn't either." Victoria's expression softened into something that might have appeared genuine to someone who hadn't witnessed her coldness moments before. "Oliver, sweetheart, I know you're still upset with me for needing some time away, but I'm back now, and things will be different." "You said we were too much work," Owen responded, his voice trembling slightly. "You said you didn't sign up to take care of cripples." Victoria flinched at the harsh word. "I never said that, darling. I was overwhelmed with grief for your mother. We're best friends, you know. I just needed time to heal." Sarah felt her dislike solidify into something harder as she recognized the manipulation. "I think it's time for you to leave, Ms. Mercer. I'll let Alex know you stopped by." Victoria's head snapped toward Sarah, her eyes flashing. "Alex? My, aren't we familiar? Do be careful, Ms. Mitchell. Alexander has a pattern of hiring pretty caregivers and then losing interest when they get too attached. It's rather pathetic, actually." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her designer heels and walked out, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the weight of unspoken history. As soon as the door closed, Sarah turned to the twins. "Are you okay?" To her surprise, Owen wheeled forward and took her hand, the first voluntary physical contact he had initiated. "You made her leave," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "She always pretends to be nice in front of Dad," Oliver added. "Nobody ever believes us when we say what she's really like." Sarah squeezed Owen's hand gently. "I believe you, always." That evening, after the boys were asleep, Sarah found Alexander in his study, working late as usual. She knocked softly on the open door. "I need to talk to you about something that happened today," she said when he looked up. Alexander set aside his tablet, gesturing for her to enter. "Is everything all right with the boys?" "They're fine now." Sarah took a seat across from him, noting the subtle changes in his appearance over the past months. He looked less rigid somehow, the perpetual tension in his shoulders slightly eased. "Victoria Mercer came by the house today." The change was immediate. His body stiffened, his expression closed. "What did she want?" "To see you, to see the boys." Sarah handed him the business card. "She said she's back in Boston permanently and wants to reconnect with all of you." Alexander took the card but didn't look at it, his eyes fixed on a point beyond Sarah's shoulder. "I assume the boys saw her?" "They came out when they heard her voice, Alex. They were upset." Owen mentioned something she apparently said after the accident, about not wanting to take care of cripples. "I'm sorry, but I have to ask, who exactly is she to them?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of deep stress. Victoria was Lillian's best friend since college. After Lillian died, Victoria was one supportive. She spent a lot of time with us, helping with the boys. Eventually, our relationship became romantic, and we got engaged, rather quickly, in retrospect. "And after the accident?" His jaw tightened. "She tried for a few weeks, but the reality of the boys' conditions, the 24/7 care they needed, the emotional trauma, it was more than she bargained for. She left while I was on a business trip to New York. Left a note saying she needed space. The boys were devastated. Another abandonment, so soon after losing their mother. The pieces were falling into place for Sarah. The twins' hostility toward caregivers, their testing behaviors, their fear of attachment. They had been left by too many people who claimed to love them. "She implied that you have a habit of getting involved with the boys' caregivers," Sarah said, deciding to address everything at once. Alexander's eyes snapped to hers, anger flashing in their blue depths. "That's absolutely false. I've maintained strict professional boundaries with all staff. Victoria is trying to create problems where none exist." "I believe you," Sarah assured him, "but I thought you should know what she said." Alexander stood and walked to the window, his back to Sarah. "I never should have gotten involved with her. The boys never fully trusted her, even before the accident. Lillian's death left me not thinking clearly. Victoria was familiar, a connection to Lillian. It was a mistake." "We all make mistakes when we're grieving," Sarah said softly. "After Michael died, I nearly moved us to Florida, because he and I had once talked about retiring there. Grief makes us grasp at anything that feels like a lifeline." Alexander turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "The boys trust you, Sarah, more than they've trusted anyone since their mother. Even Ethan, they've accepted him in a way I wouldn't have thought possible." "They're good kids," Sarah said simply. "They just needed someone to see past their defenses." Something shifted in Alexander's gaze as he looked at her, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "It's more than that. You've changed this house. For the first time since the accident, it feels like a home again." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "I should check on Ethan," Sarah said, rising from her chair. "He had a math test today that he was worried about." Alexander nodded, the moment passing but not forgotten. "Of course. Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Alex." As she closed the door behind her, Sarah leaned against the wall, trying to steady her suddenly rapid heartbeat. What was happening to her? She had come to this house for security, for a way to provide for Ethan. She hadn't expected to care so deeply for the twins, to find herself drawn to their reserved father, to feel as though she had found a place where she truly belonged. But Victoria's return had introduced a new variable into the equation. The woman clearly still had designs on Alexander and his fortune, and Sarah had no illusions about the advantages Victoria held: a shared history with the family, beauty, social standing, the kind of polished sophistication that Sarah could never match. As she walked upstairs to check on her son, Sarah tried to remind herself of the boundaries of her position. She was the caregiver, the employee. Getting emotionally involved with her employer would be complicated at best, disastrous at worst. Yet her heart, so carefully guarded since Michael's death, seemed to have other ideas. January in Boston brought bitter cold and early sunsets that painted the Blackwood mansion in shades of blue and purple each evening. Inside, however, warmth had begun to flourish, not just from the state-of-the-art heating system, but from the slowly healing hearts of those who lived there. 3 months into her position, Sarah watched as Oliver and Owen demonstrated their latest robotics project to Ethan, their voices animated as they explained how they had programmed the small machine to navigate a maze. The transformation in the twins was remarkable. Their smiles came more readily now, their occasional laughter no longer surprising the household staff. "Mom, look!" Ethan called, his face alight with excitement. "The robot can sense walls and turn automatically." "That's incredible," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "You boys have been working so hard on this." "Ethan helped with the coding," Owen said, a note of pride in his voice. "He's really good at finding bugs in the system." The casual inclusion of her son in the twins' world still caught Sarah by surprise sometimes. The initial hostility had gradually given way to tolerance, then to genuine friendship, a bond that strengthened each day as the 3 boys found common ground despite their different circumstances. "Dad's taking us to see the specialist in New York next week," Oliver added, his eyes serious but hopeful. "Dr. Chen says there's a new procedure that might help with our spinal regeneration." Sarah nodded, careful to keep her expression encouraging but not overly optimistic. "Dr. Chen is one of the best in his field. I think it's wonderful that you're exploring all options." The mention of the trip to New York caused a small flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Victoria Mercer had become an increasingly persistent presence in their lives over the past month, dropping by the mansion unexpectedly, sending expensive gifts to the twins, and somehow always managing to appear during Alexander's visits home. From the office, Sarah had noticed how the woman strategically touched Alexander's arm during conversations, referenced their shared history, and positioned herself as someone who understood his world in ways Sarah never could. More troubling was how Victoria had begun attempting to drive wedges between Sarah and the twins, making subtle comments about how temporary caregivers were in children's lives, how real family was what truly mattered. Mrs. Reynolds said, "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, Sarah reminded the boys. "Why don't you clean up here and I'll help you wash up before we eat?" As the boys began putting away their robotics equipment, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her friend. "Melissa, haven't heard from you in weeks. We're worried about you. This job is taking over your life. When are you coming up for air?" Sarah sighed, recognizing the concern, but also the undertone of judgment that had characterized her friend's messages lately. They didn't understand how her role at the Blackwood mansion had evolved into something more meaningful than just employment, how the twins had become as important to her as Ethan, how the household had begun to feel like a place she belonged. "All good. Just busy. We'll call this weekend, promise," she texted back, knowing it wasn't the detailed response Melissa wanted, but unable to fully explain the complexity of her current situation. Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with Ethan regaling everyone with tales from his new school, the twins sharing progress on their robotics project, and even Alexander contributing stories from his day at the office. These family dinners had become a regular occurrence over the past month, a dramatic change from the early days when Alexander rarely joined them and the twins ate in sullen silence. "I've been thinking," Alexander said as Mrs. Reynolds served dessert, "that we should consider a family vacation this spring, somewhere warm perhaps, Florida or the Caribbean." So the twins exchanged surprised glances before Oliver spoke. "Really? What about our therapy schedule?" "Dr. Martinez believes you're both making excellent progress," Alexander replied. "He thinks a change of scenery might actually be beneficial, as long as we maintain a modified exercise routine." "Would Sarah and Ethan come too?" Owen asked, looking anxiously between his father and Sarah. Alexander's eyes met Sarah's across the table, something unspoken passing between them. "Of course. That's the idea, all of us together." The warm flutter Sarah felt at his words was interrupted by Mrs. Reynolds appearing at the dining room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Blackwood, but Miss Mercer is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "Please tell her I'm having dinner with my family and will call her tomorrow." Mrs. Reynolds nodded and disappeared, only to return moments later looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir, but she insists. She's in the foyer and refuses to leave until she speaks with you." Alexander's jaw tightened as he placed his napkin beside his plate. "Please excuse me." "This won't take long." After he left, the joyful atmosphere deflated like a punctured balloon. The twins became quiet, their earlier animation fading into familiar guardedness. "I hate her," Oliver muttered, pushing away his half-eaten dessert. "Every time things start getting better, she shows up." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Your father just went to speak with her briefly. He'll be back soon, and we can continue our conversation about the vacation." But Alexander didn't return quickly. 10 minutes stretched into 20, and Sarah could sense the twins' anxiety growing. Finally, she stood up. "Boys, why don't you take Ethan upstairs to show him that new video game? I'll check on your father and be up soon." As the boys reluctantly left the dining room, Sarah made her way toward the foyer, a knot forming in her stomach. The sound of Victoria's melodic laugh reached her before she turned the corner, a calculated sound designed to charm. "Absolutely ridiculous that you've shut me out for so long, Alex," Victoria was saying as Sarah approached. "We were going to build a life together. One rough patch shouldn't erase all our history." "That rough patch was you abandoning my sons when they needed stability the most," Alexander replied, his voice tight. "You made your choice, Victoria. I've made mine." Victoria noticed Sarah first, her perfect features arranging themselves into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, the devoted nanny. How sweet of you to check on your employer." Alexander turned, looking both relieved and concerned to see Sarah. "Is everything all right with the boys?" "They're fine. Just wondering when you'll be rejoining us," Sarah replied, trying to project calm professionalism despite Victoria's obvious attempt to make her feel like an intruder. "In a moment," Alexander assured her before turning back to Victoria. "As I was saying, I appreciate your apology. But my focus now is on moving forward with my family. Victoria's gaze darted between them, her eyes narrowing slightly. Your family? Oh, Alex, surely you're not suggesting. She laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. And the help, really. I knew you were going through something, but this is beyond cliché. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. Mr. Blackwood, the boys are waiting. Should I tell them you'll be up shortly? Before Alexander could answer, Victoria stepped closer to him, placing a manicured hand on his chest, a gesture of intimacy that made Sarah's stomach twist. Alex, we need to finish our conversation. It's about the letters. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Surprise, perhaps confusion. What letters? Victoria glanced at Sarah pointedly. Private matters. Family matters. Alexander hesitated, then nodded to Sarah. Please tell. The boys, I'll be up in 15 minutes. We'll continue our vacation planning then. As Sarah turned to leave, Victoria's voice followed her. Oh, and Sarah, the Chanel bag I sent for Ethan's birthday next week. Make sure he gets it, won't you? I picked it out specially for him. Sarah paused, turning back slowly. Ethan is turning 9, Ms. Mercer. I don't think he has much use for a designer handbag. Victoria's smile widened. Not a handbag, darling. A backpack. I do pay attention to what children need. Some of us have natural maternal instincts after all. The dig was obvious, but Sarah refused to take the bait. How thoughtful. Good night, Miss Mercer. As she walked upstairs, Sarah tried to push away the doubt and insecurity Victoria's presence always triggered. What letters was she referring to, and why had Alexander seemed so affected by their mention? When she reached the twins' game room, she found all 3 boys engaged in a racing game, their early attention temporarily forgotten in the excitement of competition. Sarah watched them from the doorway, her heart full despite her worries. "Mom, come play," Ethan called when he noticed her. "Owen's teaching me all the shortcuts." "In a minute, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, trying to hide her troubled thoughts. "Your dad will be up soon to continue our conversation about the vacation." The twins exchanged glances again, that silent communication that had fascinated Sarah from the beginning. "Is she still here?" Oliver asked, his voice small despite his attempt to sound casual. "Your father is finishing their conversation," Sarah replied carefully. "He said it wouldn't take long." Owen set down his controller, wheeling closer to Sarah. "Did she mention the letters? She always brings them up when she wants something from Dad." Sarah tried to hide her surprise. "What letters, Owen?" The twins looked at each other again before Oliver spoke. "Mom's letters. She wrote letters to all of us before—" He swallowed hard. "Before the accident. Like she knew something might happen." "Dad never read his," Owen continued. "He couldn't. He put them away somewhere. Victoria knows where they are because she helped him hide them. She always uses them to upset him." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Lillian Blackwood had written farewell. Letters, perhaps not expecting to leave so soon, but preparing for the possibility nonetheless. Letters that Alexander had been too heartbroken to read, that Victoria now used as emotional leverage. "I see," Sarah said softly. "Thank you for telling me." She joined the boys in their game, her mind racing with this new information. When Alexander finally appeared 45 minutes later, far longer than the promised 15 minutes, his face was drawn, his posture rigid. "Everything okay, Dad?" Owen asked cautiously. Alexander forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, who's winning this race?" The rest of the evening passed with strained attempts at normalcy, Alexander participating in conversations but clearly distracted. When it was time for the twins' bedtime routine, he excused himself to take a business call, leaving Sarah to oversee the familiar rituals of medication, teeth brushing, and settling into bed. After tucking Ethan in as well, Sarah found herself drawn to the third-floor window that overlooked the driveway. Victoria's luxury sedan was gone, but the disruption she had caused lingered like a toxic cloud. A soft knock on her sitting room door startled her. Alexander stood in the hallway, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet. Sarah nodded, suddenly aware that this was the first time he had ever entered her private quarters. Alexander stepped inside but remained near the door, as if unsure of his welcome. "I wanted to apologize for this evening," he said. "Victoria's interruption was inappropriate." "You don't need to apologize," Sarah replied. "She's part of your past. I understand that these relationships are complicated." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress. "The boys told you about the letters, didn't they? I saw it in your eyes when I came back upstairs." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "They mentioned that Lillian wrote letters before the accident." Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. "What they don't know is that I did read my letter, years ago, after Victoria left." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken emotion. "What did it say?" Sarah asked gently, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, that's too personal. You don't have to—" "Lillian knew me better than anyone," Alexander interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew I would retreat into myself if anything happened to her. She wrote that she wanted me to be happy again someday, to be the father our sons deserved, to open my heart again when the time was right." He turned to face Sarah, his eyes intense. "She wrote that she hoped I would find someone who would love our sons as she did, someone who would remind me how to live instead of just exist." The air between them seemed to vibrate with tension and possibility. "Victoria claims to have the boys' letters," Alexander continued. "Letters Lillian wrote to them that they've never seen. She's offering to return them, but only if I agree, to let her back into our lives, to give her another chance." Sarah's heart sank. "I see. No, you don't." Alexander moved closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I told her no. The letters are important, yes, but I won't use emotional manipulation to make decisions about our future. The boys have finally started healing. I've started healing. Because of you, Sarah." He took another step toward her, close enough now that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. "When you came into our lives, you didn't see broken children or a damaged man. You saw people worth investing in, worth caring about. You brought Ethan into our family and showed us that life goes on, that joy is still possible." His voice dropped lower. "You've become essential to us, to me." Sarah felt her heart pounding against her ribs. "Alex, I'm your employee, the boy's caregiver. That's all this was supposed to be." "Is that all it is?" he asked softly. "Because, for me, it became something else entirely months ago." Before she could respond, a small voice from the doorway interrupted them. "Mom?" They both turned to find Ethan standing there in his pajamas, looking confused and a little scared. "I had a bad dream." The moment shattered as reality reasserted itself. Sarah moved to her son, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart. Want to tell me about it?" Alexander took a step back, professional distance returning to his demeanor. "I should let you attend to Ethan. We can continue our conversation another time." As he left, Sarah felt a confusing mix of disappointment and relief. What had almost happened, and what would it mean for all of them if it had? The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of raised voices. Following the commotion, she found Alexander in the foyer facing Victoria, who clutched a small bundle of envelopes in her hand. "Absolutely despicable, even for you," Alexander was saying, his voice cold with anger. "Using Lillian's last words to the boys as leverage. I won't allow it." Victoria's perfect composure had cracked, revealing the desperation beneath her polished exterior. "You're making a mistake, Alex. That woman isn't right for you or the boys. She'll never fit into your world." "My world is right here with my sons," Alexander replied firmly, "and Sarah has become a part of that world in a way you never were. Now I'll ask you one more time to leave those letters and go." Victoria's gaze shifted to where Sarah stood on the stairs, her eyes narrowing with hostility. "Fine, take them, but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you're making." She thrust the envelopes at Alexander before turning on her heel. "This isn't over, Alex, not by a long shot." After Victoria stormed out, Alexander stood motionless in the foyer, the letters clutched tightly in his hand. "Are those?" Sarah asked softly, descending the final steps. Alexander nodded. "Lillian's letters to the boys. Victoria has apparently had them all this time." He looked up at Sarah, his expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." "Don't be," Sarah said. "The boys will be so grateful to have these." Alexander glanced down at the envelopes, then back at Sarah. "Last night, before we were interrupted, I was trying to tell you something important." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Alex, please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "When I lost Lillian, I thought I lost everything. I shut down. Couldn't be the father my sons needed. I buried myself in work and grief. Then you came into our lives and everything changed." He set the letters down on the entryway table and moved closer to Sarah. "I don't want you to be my employee anymore, Sarah. I want you to be my partner, in every sense of the word. I want us to be a family. You, me, the boys, Ethan, all of us together." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. "Are you sure? It's a big step." Alexander took her hands in his. "I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Sarah. I think I have since that first night you stood in my kitchen and challenged me to be a better father. And the boys adore you. You've given them back their joy, their trust in the world." "And Ethan?" Sarah whispered. "He's still healing too." "Ethan is an amazing child because he has an amazing mother," Alexander said softly. "He deserves a family that will love and support him as he grows. I want to be part of that family if you'll let me." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, the love, the hope, the promise of a future she had never dared imagine after Michael's death. "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, to all of it." When they told the boys later that morning, presenting them with their mother's letters and the news of their evolving relationship, the response was a mixture of tears and celebration. Oliver and Owen held their letters reverently, promising to read them in private when they were ready. Ethan bounced with excitement at the idea of being part of a bigger family, already planning how they would redecorate to make the mansion less fancy and more fun. That night, as she stood on the balcony outside her suite, looking out at the snow-covered city beyond, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to the Blackwood mansion desperate and afraid, searching for security and stability. She had found so much more: healing for her wounded heart, a home for her son, and a family created not from obligation, but from choice and love. As Alexander joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling for the first time in years the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. Sarah smiled, watching as the first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall, glittering in the mansion's lights like tiny stars. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead us exactly where we need to go." Alexander turned her in his arms, his eyes reflecting all the love she felt in her own heart. "Welcome home, Sarah," he whispered, before lowering his lips to hers, in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Behind them, the mansion glowed with warmth and life, a beacon in the winter night, no longer a house of shadows and pain, but a true home where a family, forged in adversity and bound by love, had finally found their way back to joy. The end, dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by Sarah and Alexander's journey from brokenness to healing. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've created a special playlist that explores the complexities of blended families and second chances at love. You can find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that delve into life's most profound challenges and triumphs. Don't miss our upcoming content. We have more heartwarming tales coming your way. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below.